There is so much going on in the world right now. Everyone should be paying very close attention. The world is moving in a very calculated way, and there are so many different avenues they can go down. It's very hard on what to focus on. What we know for certain is that they are not keeping the general public at a very high level of preparedness and readiness. They make casual mentions of all the different issues that are developing, but there's no real call for alertness. I was told that in the 1950s, they made a movie that prepared the public for the event of a nuclear bomb being dropped on the country. They even showed it in schools. That is a way of preparing the masses for the possibilities of great problems. But today, there's nothing even close to this, although the potential for conflicts and economic collapse are at an extremely high level. They are not preparing the public. They are keeping them asleep, sedated, and living like lambs to slaughter. They are keeping everyone distracted, speaking more about Governor Cuomo's scandal and Trump's speech at CPAC, or other distractions within sports, entertainment, and music. But what is actually happening that could affect everyone in the world, they are covering in small bites, only for those with discerning eyes and ears to pick up on. But I believe we must be informed of what is happening around us, or at least the narratives they are forming, so that we can move in power, being proactive instead of reactive. So I want to tell you what is happening in the world at this time, in hopes that those that understand are convicted in getting their houses in order and being ready for tribulation and redemption. Let's begin. COVID, Phase 2. So let's start with this right here. There are changes happening right now that we all need to identify with and be mindful of. I cannot say for certain what is actually happening, because there are so many different conflicting stories happening all at once. So I feel that in the end, conflict is a part of the overall narrative. But either way, it feels like we are in Phase 2 of the agenda leading to the Great Reset. If you watch the video about the Great Reset, the video showed that many leaders know that we are never going back to the old normal, and they are using COVID as a justification for the many changes that need to happen to implement their Great Reset. But the main issue that I'm seeing is that there is a change in the narrative, at least in the United States. The narrative is all over the place. They say the number of deaths and cases in the United States have gone down, but they also have said that there are new variants that are a big risk as well, and it seems we will never see the end to COVID. Many of the states are lowering their restrictions, while there still is a majority that have not gotten vaccinated. Biden has just said that we will have enough doses to vaccinate all adults by May.
This country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May. By the end of May.
But then you see Texas and Mississippi just reopened their states and took away the mask mandate.
It is now time to open Texas 100%. All businesses of any type are allowed to open 100%. Also, I am ending the statewide mask mandate.
And then Joe Biden comes with a speech that says we cannot let up and we all need to continue with the protocols that were in place. He also said this.
The last thing we need is the Neanderthal thinking that in the meantime everything's fine, take off your mask, forget it. It still matters.
And then we have Governor Newsom of California, who's going the opposite direction of Texas and Mississippi and asking the state to wear double mask, to wear two. There are so many conflicting things happening in the United States in regards to the virus that it seems that, like I said, conflict is a part of the agenda. We are 1 year from the time where the virus really took hold of the country, and there are sides that want to remove restrictions and reopen, and the other side that wants to continue with the restrictions. It all sounds like conflict, at least here in the United States. Soon as the month of March started, the narrative started changing, which to me sounds like they are moving into a new phase of their agenda, and uniformity is obviously not a part of the agenda, so we must move with caution. Do not let your guard down and feel like because the narrative is changing means that things are getting back to normal. All this means is that we are moving into the next phase of the agenda, and the full scope has not been seen yet. I'm not speaking of putting your guard down about the virus. If you have followed this channel, you know my thoughts on this whole topic. What I am speaking of is keeping your guard up in reference to whatever else is on their agenda for change. Please understand that COVID is not going away until all their new systems of control are in place. So being that some of the narrative is suggesting that we're going back to normal means that something else is on the horizon. Please be mindful and do not let them fool you to put your guard down and make you think everything is on its way back to normal. They have not made the vaccine required as of yet, and we are seeing the first case against mandatory vaccinations filed in New Mexico. But again, Joe Biden has said we will have enough doses to vaccinate everyone, and he also said he will use the full force of the government to ensure our safety. So we don't know what is on the horizon for certain, but one thing for certain is that we shouldn't be letting our guards down. The rest of the world is moving in a straight direction, and though there is protest, they are still moving on with the agenda. The United States, the supposed leader of the world, seems to be the major place where there is no real uniformity. And while we at home may have our feelings on what we prefer, more restrictions or less, there is definitely a reason for the confusion and conflicting messaging. And that is something that most Americans haven't really come to terms with. In order for there to be a new world order, the old world order must be dismantled. The United States is the current leader of this order. So what this confusion and conflicting messaging is really about is to show that the United States is still deeply divided, and more importantly, the United States is not the leading standard of the world any longer. The United States is losing its leadership position in the world, and that will be disastrous for the many that have not prepared for the consequences of this. The other part of the agenda is to show a need for global uniformity. When all the countries around the world have different standards, it will prove that there can never be any peace and safety until there are global rules that every nation follows. But we will see as things develop. Here's what we do know, and is not being reported in the mainstream news. According to military.com, the military may revisit making COVID-19 vaccines mandatory after FDA grants approval. On March 1st, the day when it looks like the Phase 2 began, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby indicated full FDA approval could change how the military's leadership looks at this issue of mandatory vaccinations. So they are considering this. And on top of this, the bigger agenda of using applications like ClearPass, like I mentioned in the video, What to Expect in 2021, we know that that is still coming. They've even started introducing it in New York. This agenda is not about microchipping people. I repeat, it's not about this. They are moving us into the new system that eventually will be totally controlled through some enforcement of control, like a chip, that will not only be our ID, but our wallets, privacy controls, monitoring and tracking, and many other functions as well. We are being moved into a new global system, and they are starting this with the new implementation of digital passports. Like this article from the New York Times explains, vaccine passports, COVID's next political flashpoint. The article says, the next major flashpoint over coronavirus response has already provoked cries of tyranny and discrimination in Britain, protests in Denmark, digital disinformation in the United States, and geopolitical skirmishing within the European Union. The subject of debate, vaccine passports. Government-issued cards or smartphone badges stating that the bearer has been inoculated against the coronavirus. The idea is to allow families to reunite, economies to restart, and hundreds of millions of people who have received the shot to return to a degree of normalcy, all without spreading the virus. Some versions of the documentation might permit bearers to travel internationally. Others would allow entry to vaccinated-only spaces like gyms, concerts, venues, and restaurants.
Julio Castañeda is flying to New York, and before he can board his flight, he has to prove that he's COVID-free.
You download the app on your phone, it has all your information.
This is AOK Pass, a digital health passport that verifies whether someone has tested negative for the coronavirus or gotten inoculated. It's also known as a vaccine passport and meant to be easier to use and more reliable than paper immunization cards. Travel industry experts say this type of digital health certificate could be a game changer, not just for tourism, but live events and schools. So here's how digital health passports work. Travelers who weren't able to take a COVID-19 test before departure at this airport in Rome can get swabbed at a testing site set up by the airport. While waiting for the result, Passengers can download the AOK Pass app and input their personal information like their birthday and email address. Within 30 minutes, the result is available. If the traveler tests negative, the app creates a unique QR code that serves as proof.
The doctor's scanning like the QR code that says that you're negative and you're good to go.
At the airport in Rome, it has to be scanned at check-in and boarding.
I think this is the only way really right now to travel like safely without like risking contracting COVID.
Some, but not all, airlines and governments require proof of a negative test before a passenger is allowed to board a flight or enter a country. While testing and vaccinations reduce the risk of spreading the virus, they don't eliminate it.
In the setting of COVID-19, health information is beginning to be used in a transactional sense, much more than before.
Chester Drum is a doctor at the National University Hospital in Singapore and co-founded AOK Pass. He expects that in order for people to return to pre-pandemic life, they'll have to show proof of their health status.
Let me show you part of my medical record to get on an airplane. Let me show you that I've had a vaccination procedure in order to go to an event, for example.
That's all very telling. And whatever they have planned in phase 2, it will undoubtedly lead to global acceptance of this digital passport. This is the new system. It is a system built on massive controls. We should never turn our back to it and hope that it will not come online when we know that this is a goal and agenda for their Great Reset. And it has already been implemented in Israel. Look at what has taken place there.
Israelis must now scan in to get in to gyms, hotels, even concerts like this.
It is all set in the telephone. It's very convenient.
For more than 3 million Israelis and counting, this is the ticket back to some kind of normalcy.
Finally, all the way in the car, I sang back to life, back to reality.
The government-issued Green Pass shows personal details and proves they've had 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. Now countries across Europe and beyond are considering similar so-called vaccine passports or immunity certificates.
In my video, What the Future Looks Like After COVID, and watch this before you go back into society, I explained that many other countries like China have already been using digital passports to move around the country. And like I said in those videos, this will move to the rest of the world. Well, we are here in those times, and we are seeing that this is happening. Of course, Israel had to have this implemented there, with the importance of all the future events set to transpire there. But this is being debated all over the world. Now, most likely will not fully come into implementation until there is a world government that is administering it to the world. Right now, they are just conditioning and rolling it out in their phases. But like I said, the US is not a leader in this new system. We are in fact quite behind, and you cannot lead from behind. The overall theme I am seeing throughout all the news is that the United States is no longer the world leader. And if you watch the video about the Great Reset, they have already been alluding to this being the case in order for the Great Reset to happen. But with the new system being rolled out, everyone should be paying attention and asking themselves, what does that mean for you? Will you participate in this system if you are forced or required to? What does that mean for you if you do not fully comply? What does that mean for you if you live in the United States and the US is no longer the leader of the world? These are all thoughts and questions you should have answers for. You must make sure your mind is ready before you are forced to make decisions without a chance for thought. Let's talk about the next thing. Economic collapse. Listen, like I keep alluding to, we are in really bad times. It just hasn't caught up to the majority. Think about it. We have this new global currency that keeps valuing itself higher against all other fiat currencies around the world, and is not causing alarm bells to ring for the masses. Over the past year, Bitcoin has climbed to all-time highs, not too long ago, breaking 50,000. We see a new system being implemented with the COVID passports, and we see a new system with global money being built where it is completely digital. But the masses, for the most part, don't even care or notice. Even the people that notice this new system still can't get their heads off this old system that is clearly about to be replaced. I just wish people understood just how close to a financial collapse we actually are. Everything points to a financial collapse, except the stock market, which is unfortunately what the financially illiterate mainly look to. It's so sad how short our memories are, because if we look back in 2007, the stock market was reaching all-time highs until one day they started alluding to a housing bubble popping, and then all of a sudden, the market collapse happened very quickly. The market never prepared people for the collapse. There were other indicators that the masses were not paying attention to, and this is exactly the same script we are seeing today. But it's funny because we are actually getting the warnings. Or maybe they're doing the same thing, but this time, I'm the one actually paying attention. Either way, look at the facts for yourself. Since the Great Recession in 2008, when the central banks around the world worked together to slow the recession by excessive money printing through quantitative easing and low interest rates, the stock market has steadily been increasing for over a decade, with only small little corrections. But we have been in the longest bull market in history. Everyone should be expecting a major correction. This is just how the market works, a healthy market at least. What we are in today is a complete fabrication of one. There are many different bubbles in our economic system. There is a debt bubble, a stock market bubble, a housing bubble, a currency asset price bubble, and there are no signs of it ever slowing, only popping. I can't even keep up with all the stimulus they are pumping. We are in our third stimulus bill. There was the CARES Act for $1.8 trillion passed in March of 2020. Then we had the omnibus spending and COVID relief bill passed in December of 2020 that was for $1.4 trillion. And now they are working on passing the third bill, the American Rescue Plan stimulus bill for $1.9 trillion, just 3 months after the last trillion. That's a total of $5.1 trillion in just a year, just on extra money that they want to use to stimulate the economy. The masses only hear how much money they are receiving in their checks and are not considering where all this money is actually coming from and who's going to pay for it later. But you should. All this money printing has consequences, and it is just leading to a bigger bubble. The United States dollar is the world reserve currency, but they are printing it like it has very little value. Inflation is already happening, but people aren't recognizing it. The Fed even admitted that there is inflation. Those low oil prices are rising. They are seeing $4 gas in California right now. Prices are slowly rising on items all across the country, but it's happening very quietly. Stores are raising the prices incrementally. Businesses are raising the rates for service. Food is costing more. People just don't recognize how much change is upon them. Like I was just speaking about in regards to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. You think it's the value of Bitcoin rising? No, that's just how they want you to think. It's actually the opposite. It's the value of our fiat currency falling against Bitcoin. As the value of Bitcoin increases, it actually is saying the value of the dollar and the other fiat currencies are falling. And if you have taken my advice and still are following the debt, you will see that the declared US debt is now above $28 trillion. It's still counting, obviously, with them trying to pass these new stimulus bills. There is also massive movement in our bond market, which is signaling a major market correction. Like this article from Bloomberg explains, Treasury yields surge past 1.6%, sounding alarm for risk assets. What that means is that people are selling our treasuries, which is driving up the yields. As we see the yields increase, that means the rates on many things like mortgages and credit card rates are raising as well. The stock market at all-time high while people are selling our debt. It doesn't match. And when things start to make sense, it will be too late for everyone not paying attention. Even mortgage rates are rising because there is a sell-off in our debt. This could pop the bubble in the housing market. Watch the 10-year and 30-year treasuries. This is our debt. When people are selling it, it means they are no longer wanting to loan us money. It's happening enough right now to gain attention, but won't really be a big issue until the real event happens. And on top of this warning about the treasuries, we are also getting warnings of many different bubbles. The mainstream media and financial analysts are finally, quietly admitting that there are bubbles. The financial channels like CNBC report on it, but they say, no, we don't think there's one, leaving the trusting public unprepared. Because if people would think for themselves, it's completely obvious that we are in a bubble. When the government spends $5.1 trillion past what their budget even calls for, even though they are already in a deficit, bringing in less than what they are spending. Look at these articles. Yahoo. Bank of America issues warning about potential stock market bubble. Or an article in Politico says, Biden's bubble risk, a reckoning in markets as the economy recovers. Giant bubbles are once again inflating all over the financial world, creating a potential problem for Washington in the coming months. Wall Street pros and Washington policymakers know that some or all of these bubbles could explode in spectacular ways, but nobody really knows what to do about it. And look at what CNN reported. China is sounding the alarm about a global market bubble. One of China's most powerful financial officials is sounding the alarm over a bubble in global markets. Wu Shuqing, forgive my pronunciation, the Communist Party boss at the People's Bank of China, told reporters in Beijing on Tuesday that confidence in Chinese markets could be hit by volatility around the world. Listen what he says. We are really afraid the bubble for foreign financial assets will burst someday, said Guo, who is also chairman of China's Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission. You see, nothing but alarm bells ringing. But what is the general public doing? When you look at everyone around you, do they look like they're prepared for a major economic bubble bursting? It's really ridiculous. When talking about the COVID passports and a global system being implemented, this financial collapse event goes completely along with it, and it will force the world to take leadership roles out of the United States' hand. Everyone should be preparing for an economic collapse. Let's go to the next one. World War. The other thing that could force this new system and the Great Reset to happen is World War, which is also inevitable. But I do believe that the economic collapse will trigger World War, as the United States does not want to admit fault in their financial management, so they will play the blame game. But this is my speculation, of course. I do not know the future. But I know the potential for world conflict is high. In other videos like this, I have explained the different conflicts in the world, so you should have an understanding of the potential conflicts. What I want to emphasize is some major events that have transpired over the past weeks. In the last week of February, President Biden took his first military action and completed a U.S. airstrike over Syria, targeting Iran-backed militia, killing one fighter. It's funny, because people keep expecting change from these new presidents, but they always still stick within the same military objectives. This airstrike obviously didn't lower potentials for conflict, but heightened it, because days later, this happened.
An Israeli-owned cargo ship has been hit by a mystery explosion just hours after the U.S. targeted Iranian-supported militia in Syria with airstrikes.
An Israeli ship gets attacked very shortly after the U.S. attack in Syria. And Netanyahu of Israel directly blames Iran. This conflict is heating up. The United States also decided to place sanctions on Russia for the nerve agent attack. The article in the AP says the Biden administration sanctioned 7 mid-level and senior Russian officials on Tuesday, along with more than a dozen government entities, over a nearly fatal nerve agent attack on opposition leader Alexei Navalny and his subsequent jailing. You see, these sanctions aren't really something that changes things for these Russian officials, as the country has been making moves from the dollar dependence for some time now. But Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said early Tuesday, in anticipation of the American sanctions, that if enacted, Russia would reciprocate. He called the US and EU sanctions illegitimate and an example of common behavior the West employs, for no reason. The narrative seems to show that the world is tired of the United States, and as the United States moves, the other countries come right back, which is quite different than the way things were decades ago. And please don't forget that China has already told its military to be prepared for war at any moment. And the South China Morning Post reported that in the South China Sea, Taiwan fires up missile tests to coincide with Beijing's month of military drills. Taiwan will stage 6 rounds of military tests this month, along with other military drills, to step up its defense capabilities, as the People's Liberation Army conducts a month-long exercise in the South China Sea. There is great potential for military conflict. And though I do believe the economic collapse comes first, I do not know that for certain. What I do know is that the world is very much on edge, and ready for a shift and change, but the masses are not ready for it. Next, the Equality Act.
The bill is passed.
The House of Representatives passed the landmark Equality Act with a 224 to 206 vote. 3 Republicans joined Democrats to pass the bill. The legislation amends the 1964 Civil Rights Act to ban discrimination against people based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Every American deserves respect and dignity, and it's important that the Equality Act become law because it will once and for all ensure that LGBTQ Americans can live lives free of discrimination.
Most House Republicans and some religious groups oppose the legislation, arguing it will infringe on religious freedom.
The Equality Act is truly a radical proposal that would change how Americans raise their families and serve their communities. It moves our nation away from our Judeo-Christian values and takes away parents' rights to decide. This is a disgrace and an overreach on the family unit and the way that we raise our children.
It's a bill the president wants to sign into law during his first 100 days. The Equality Act provides long overdue federal civil rights protections for LGBTQ+ Americans, preventing discrimination in our housing, education, public services, and lending systems. By redefining sex discrimination, the measure would provide for abortion on demand, likely end a long-standing prohibition on taxpayer-funded abortions, and remove conscience protections for doctors and nurses. Biological men would be allowed to compete in women's sports, effectively obliterating Title IX, while girls and women would be forced to share locker rooms and bathrooms in schools and public places. Under the bill, Christian beliefs are unlawful. Churches could be prevented from requiring employees to abide by their biblical beliefs about marriage and differences between men and women. Alliance Defending Freedom is litigating a case in Virginia, a state that recently passed a law like the Equality Act.
Churches are banned from having a dress code, having a code of conduct for their employees, even asking in interviews if potential employees share core religious beliefs.
Harley and others opposed to the legislation say tolerance must be a two-way street.
I think the Equality Act treats people of faith as second-class citizens. It specifies a certain point of view, and it labels it as bigotry.
If people just open their eyes and just look at what's happening right in the country they live in, they would recognize that we all must be getting our houses in order. The world is changing, and people are walking like zombies unaware. We really need to understand what time it is in this world. Nothing tells us more than the Equality Act legislation that was just passed in the House. This is a law that they are labeling as protecting civil rights and reducing discrimination. But it is so much deeper than that. This law will fundamentally change how we live and what we have the right to feel or believe. There would be sweeping changes that will come into effect, and if you do not agree with it, you are actually breaking the law. It actually makes it against the law to hold specific beliefs according to your faith. So if the Bible speaks against homosexuality, which it clearly does, and you believe in the Bible and want to live through that value, you're actually breaking the law. This Equality Act is not law yet, but even the fact that it's something that is close to becoming law, having a leader that has pledged to sign it into law, it says a whole lot about the times that we are in and are about to enter into. This world is all about rebellion and sin, and I think the cherry on top comes from what the Pope has said. The man who is supposed to be the greatest religious leader on earth has said this: Pope Francis has warned that mankind is facing a second great flood caused by climate change, unless leaders act to fix corruption and injustice. Francis made the comments to Italian writer Marco Pozza, who is also chaplain of Padula prison, in a new book that is due to be published in March. An excerpt from the book, called Of Vice and Virtues, was published by Corriere della Sera on Sunday. While discussing justice, Francis brings up the example of the biblical flood which destroyed the world except for Noah, who was deemed virtuous enough to survive. The flood itself may have been a myth, Francis says. Yes, that's what he said. The flood itself may have been a myth, but it is used as an example to show how God uses wrath to punish injustice and right wrongs in this world. There are so many things wrong with the statements he's making. I mean, in this, he is basically saying that we will not be judged by our sins, but from what we do to the earth. I mean, the man says that Noah's flood was probably a myth. We are in a time of great rebellion, and it is climaxing. Just last weekend, in his quest to unite the world's religions, the Pope went on a visit to Iraq and met with the Shiite Ayatollah. The article in AP says, in Iraq's holiest city, a pontiff will meet a revered Ayatollah and make history with a message of coexistence in a place plagued by bitter divisions. This is what happened when they met.
A meeting that was months in the making, every detail carefully planned. After a photo op, the two men spoke privately for 40 minutes. The Ayatollah reportedly telling the Pope he also believes Christians should be able to live in peace in Iraq and enjoy the same rights as other Iraqis. It's a powerful statement from Sistani, who rarely makes his opinions known. When he does, Shiites in Iraq and around the world take note. Later, the Pope arrived in the ancient city of Ur, known as the birthplace of Abraham, the biblical patriarch revered by Christians, Muslims, and Jews. A fitting place for an interfaith meeting where Francis underscored his message. Peace does not demand winners or losers, but rather brothers and sisters who, for all the misunderstandings and hurts of the past, are journeying from conflict to unity.
The bottom line is that the world is about to change, and we must be ready. While the rest of the world walks like zombies into the Great Tribulation, we believers must stand on solid ground and rebuke the enemy and his ways. We must not be steered into his darkness, but held fast and walk straight into our Father's marvelous light, not the false light that the ages of darkness masquerade in. As this darkness approaches, I obviously do not know what awaits me. Will I be killed for my beliefs? Will my family die from hunger because of our detachment from society? Is the rapture doctrine true? So many different thoughts that the enemy tries to bring to my mind as I walk in these last days. I am not perfect. I struggle like many others with my flesh. But what I do not do is let that struggle linger and grow. When I feel it, I cast it out and go back to my source and strength and know that I will trust in Yahuwah and depend on him. And whatever he has planned for my life, I surrender to it. I will trust in his word and depend on his promises. Because no matter what, as long as I am in him, regardless of what tomorrow brings, my eternal promises are secure. And that is really what this life I live today is all about. I live to make myself and my family ready for him, and I will always believe and trust in him. I know no one knows the day or hour, so all I can do is stay ready for him, so he does not come upon me like a thief. Yeshua has told us, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your master is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 through 44. So I am living ready at all times for him, because I do not know what hour he will come. I just live in faithfulness and obedience and know that I will not be moving in the direction this world is trying to take me. All this info is given to you to show you that no matter what, the world is moving on and changing. And even if you choose to ignore all of it and act like it's not happening, it doesn't matter. When the full agenda has come about, you will be forced to either comply or resist. But if you have not already solidified your stance in your faith and understanding of why this is all happening, you will fall into their traps. People seem to think that Bible prophecy will happen with a label saying, hey, this agenda is Bible prophecy and you shouldn't fall for it. It doesn't happen that way. Yeshua said that the days had to be shortened so that even the elect wasn't deceived and carried away. So if you're not being diligent in carrying out your faith and walking strong in it, these biblically prophetic events will come upon you without you realizing it until you have believed in the Antichrist, his false prophet, their false religion, and their false system. This info has been made for you to come to terms with what is truly happening and urge you to make a decision now. Again, your ignorance will not save you in the end. When economic collapse happens, it will affect you. What will you do? When war happens, it will affect you. What will you do then? When laws change and you are not allowed to live out your personal beliefs, what will you do then? It's at this time, right now, that you must strengthen yourself and make sure you are grounded in your faith. You cannot spend your time living for this world. You cannot spend your time preparing yourself to grow within this world system, because it will leave you unprepared when it all changes. And I have made this video to concretely point out to you how fast and how much change is upon us. In the end, maybe it creates urgency in you, or maybe you will just ignore it. But you have been told and warned. We are responsible for the choices we make in life. Make sure that in these last days, while the evidence is so clear and Father is providing so much knowledge and proof to you, make sure you do not reject him. Make sure you follow his voice and come to him, because he is calling you to be ready. Be ready and be blessed. Okay, thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please don't forget to like and share this with others. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to this channel. Elohim willing, I upload every Friday. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, truthunedited.com. Please subscribe there. I'm thankful for all of you. Thank you especially to those Elohim has placed it on your hearts to give, and you have done so. This ministry is not easy, and your donations truly help. Your blessings truly support this ministry. Thank you for your obedience to Yah's call on your heart. I thank all of you for the support. Okay, thanks again for watching. I love you all.